going to go, we've got a guest panelist ready to ask you a question.
Great.
He is in fact a colleague of yours. I would imagine that Vincent is coming up here. Yeah, Vincent's just got to get his mic and camera. There we go. There's Vincent.
Hey, Vincent.
Hello.
It's nice to see you.
Thanks for sharing all these thoughts with us tonight. My question for you is around, the government of Canada has that target to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Looking at the long term, what do you think should be Alberta's role in meeting that target?
Good question. I think we have a lot of roles to play, right? So I think both kind of locally, we have a big role to play in decarbonizing our electricity sector, as you and I have often talked about in the past. And I think we're well on our way to that, right? So, we have a lot of great wind and solar resources that are, starting to be used more and more in the province. So I think Alberta has a role to play in continuing to build out that low carbon electricity resource. And then I would couple that with really developing some of the solutions and technologies, and then producing some of the materials that Canada is going to need to get there. So some of that decarbonizing the industrial sector, the production of materials that say will go into batteries for electric vehicles and for transport. And then also, for example, if hydrogen ends up being, say, the way that some of the longer distance transport ends up going, I think Alberta can continue to play a big role in, just as we do today, in producing a lot of the resources that the country needs.
Did that get your question answered, Vincent? You're allowed to follow up if you'd like, because the Prime Minister, he gives a question and a follow-up. So I feel like if you want to follow up, you're welcome to have one.
I guess on the electricity work, and I know you co-wrote an article with Blake Schaefer on that. Do you think it's building transmission lines between provinces is the right fit as part of the green recovery? And I'm wondering in terms of like the planning that could delay some of these constructions to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think that transmission lines are important, right? I mean, I like to think about it as a little bit like a race between transmission line and more local storage. But we do have quite a kind of chopped up electricity grid across Canada. And so we would benefit quite a bit from increasing transmission capacity to British Columbia, for example, as well as down into the States. And there is, just being able to balance, and that's one of the things Blake and I talked about in that article. But one of, I think, the misconceptions about those transmission lines and that opportunity is the idea that this is something that benefits, only or primarily British Columbia, and that somehow, they're going to sell us expensive power and this is going to be so great for them and so not good for us. But actually, as we look to further electrification across the country, including in British Columbia, Alberta can produce a lot of electricity through our wind and solar resources at a price that's, it's sort of the cheapest new electricity resource that you can build out. And so there's a big opportunity for us here in Alberta too, in having those transmission lines and being able to export our power to BC as a source for them for electrification. So I would like to see those move forwards, and I think that there is, of course, there are real challenges around approvals and finding the right routes and those kinds of things. But I think as experience really across North America shows that often the transmission line challenge is really more of a almost political one. And so, I think with the political will there and the view that, this is an important piece of getting to that net zero target, I think it is achievable.
Thanks for your question, Vincent. I should also mention that not only is he a colleague of Sara's from Pembina, but he's also a former Calgary Climate Hub board member and still a Calgary Climate Hub member. We're members for life, right, Vincent?
That's right.
So that's me giving a little pitch for the Calgary Climate Hub. So what I would say to anybody, if you're not a member yet, you should consider becoming a member, because it really does help to be able to go and work with people who are trying to move the ball and aren't just trying to talk and make noise, but actually working with the city and other organizations to try to get us to where we need to be on climate. So thank you, Vincent.
Great to
Up
see you,
next,
Sarah.
we've
Thanks,
got
Good to
Steve.
see you too.
all right. Actually, Sarah, can I ask you about your background there? What's going on with all the cars? I'm dying to know.
So the car, this was sort of the, like, in the first days where everybody was working from home, this was the space, and this is actually used to be my kids' room.
Okay.
And it kind of ended up as my background, and then I liked it, so I decided I would just go with it. So I like to joke that these are my electric vehicles. They are Scandinavian. This is a Scandinavian print, but you can tell because they have no tailpipes. So it's very, very appropriate for someone who thinks about energy transition.
I like it. That's wonderful. Okay, our next panelist, we're going to bring up Rose Jackson. And so Rose Jackson is one of the leaders of the Fridays for Future movement, climate youth movement. And whenever I can, I take the opportunity to mention that Rose and her teammates in the youth climate strike movement were out speaking truth to power at City Hall in minus 29-degree weather. Every Friday they could be out there. They were out there. And the only reason they're not out there now is because they're, like all climate activists, smart enough to socially distance ourselves properly. But anyways, Rose Jackson, thank you for coming on. And what's your question for Sarah?
Just want to make sure, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I kind of have like a two-part question. So just transition, we all know that we've got to do it. What are your thoughts on the Green Deal made for Alberta by Albertans that kind of emphasizes the transition for workers in terms of like skills and transitioning towards the green energy sector, climate change, education, and innovation, and would that be possible within the next few years?
Yeah, good question. And I mean, that's really the big challenge, and so critical that the transition does, isn't leaving people behind and is creating more opportunities. And I would say that's both, thinking about kind of people that are, maybe will be, have say an attractive job today that may or may not be there after a transition, but actually also thinking about people who may be left out of the economy today. How can we use that transition as a way to bring more people in as well too, and to kind of address other underlying issues around equality. And so, this is an area I think that is, people are really aware that we need to work on it, and there is no silver bullet, simple answer. But the best approaches are sort of a combination of things, right? So one is that piece of kind of, for people that are really, say close to retirement, or for whatever reason, there isn't going to be a way for them to kind of find a space in that new economy. It's thinking about how do you support them and provide them with the early retirement funds or things like that that are going to allow them to kind of come out of the transition okay. And then there's that middle tranche of sort of, retraining, right? So where can you find ways to help provide people with the skills to be able to, continue to do their work within that new economy piece. And that's where, the extent to which, say, we start to look into mining rare earths, there's a lot of complementary skills for people that are already, say, working in industry today. But certainly making sure that we're funding education and funding the right kind of technical upskilling type education is going to be key. And then for younger people that are still in school and kind of choosing their path, I think there's a big responsibility to show people that there is an opportunity here, and that's hard, right? Because for folks that have been in the industry or working for a long time, they kind of know maybe one way of making the economy in Alberta work. And so, certainly I think we do well to look beyond our borders and see, ways that, well, beyond our borders and also into our past, and see ways that, we've been able to kind of accept and find new pathways previously. But that's where that education piece is really critical. And then there's some things that are, beyond kind of, I would say, my area of expertise, but I find really interesting about that have been going on within this discussion around the state that we've been in with COVID, and the attention that it's brought to the idea of, for a whole half of the population, for women in the population that are doing most of the caregiving work, how this is making us so aware of the fact that a lot of that work isn't being, maybe acknowledged and isn't being acknowledged financially. And so I think there's a lot of broader questions that we're going to come out of this with around how do we build sort of a more just economy more broadly. And I hope that, that carbon piece of the transition is one part of that. But I also hope that it's a chance to kind of look more holistically at some of those challenges we need to address.
Mm-hmm. And so for like a quick second question, how would you suggest like youth can effectively spark more conversations about the Green New Deal or sustainable development policy within like policymaker and governmental spheres? Just like any suggestions?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think, there's a lot that has been accomplished already, and so that's certainly something to be proud of that folks like you have done. I think using your, certainly for youth that are able to vote, definitely using your vote and getting all your friends to vote, because, I'm a big believer in that a lot of this stuff comes ultimately through policy change. It may not start there, but that's a critical piece of that. So having governments that are, going to put those types of policies into place are key. I think also, the kind of demand that you have for, for programs within schools, that gets people's attention too. I know that at the universities across Alberta, there's been a real shift away from an interest in some of the more oil and gas type majors. And I think that is making people kind of aware that, okay, there actually really is going to be a shift here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Okay, thank you, Rose. And keep up the great work. I know you will. I guess, let me see. We have one more panelist that will be loading up. But in the meantime, I have a question from Stephen Harding, who's one of our excellent volunteers. He's done a lot of great work helping me with our Community Climate Conversations initiative. He wants to know, does Alberta have enough solar and wind potential to replace fossil fuels for all electrical generation? And if not, what else can we do to clean the grid?
Great question. So, certainly on a pure kind of megawatt production basis, we do. We have a lot of space and we have pretty good resources. Of course, the challenge becomes then producing the power at the time that you need it. And that obviously adds some additional challenges. But generally speaking, greening or the grid, reducing carbon from electricity production will be a combination of those things. So we definitely need to ramp up pretty dramatically, and we are, taking first steps there. The amount of wind and solar we're producing. Then we need to get those transmission lines in place that will allow us to balance that power, so to send power to places, especially those that have a lot of hydro when we don't need it, and take it back when we do. There'll be then also some storage pieces that come into play there, and that's everything from that shorter term storage like batteries, also longer term. People are looking at all kinds of new technologies around old is new, heat storage, right? So basically making something hot and keeping it that way. And then also on the demand side, the demand management side too. So historically, energy production was all about, or electricity production was all about producing to meet demand. Going forward, it's going to be increasingly about matching demand to the times of use. So, and that's a whole suite of things, of finding ways to shift demand where, it might be possible, for example, if you have an electric vehicle, to be charging that overnight, down to, managing the way that our heating and cooling systems come on in a more kind of what's the word, in a way that's more controlled, so that we are able to manage those peaks or spikes in demand. And so decarbonizing power, I think that's something that we're really, yes, we do want to continue to see improvements in storage, but we have a pretty good pathway to get there. And it's really a matter of getting those, kind of getting that target in place and starting to do the hard work of getting there.
Okay, sounds good. I guess I was hoping we have Devin up for our as our panelist. I don't see him up yet. And we have got a number of questions here. I feel like we may end up transcribing some of them and asking you via Twitter over the next few days. Is that something you'd be hip to?
Yeah, sounds good.
Maybe that'll be a new
I
thing.
spent a lot of time on there.
Yeah, me too. Too much.
Yeah.
Let me see. I will ask another question. We do know. I'm hearing that Devin is here, so let's let her buck. But in the meantime, as we wait, I will. I may go to another one of our attendees, an anonymous attendee in this case, is asking for your position on the Orphan Wells situation. I think we sort of talked about that a little bit, but that generally it's a positive thing that we're taking care of it. It maybe we'd like it if we didn't have to, and if the oil companies had taken care of it themselves. But you're positive about that choice.
So I think it's good. I think there's two pieces, like to everything, there's two pieces to that. So, I mean, there's the situation that we're in now where there are orphan wells that, need to be addressed, and inactive wells that also, are basically at risk of becoming orphans. And so I think it makes sense to address those. At the same time, what we do need to see, and what was sort of promised with the money, but we haven't seen the details of, is a change in the regulations that got us there in the first place, right? So there are ways to, basically do things like require bonding, so companies are putting money up earlier on. Also, actually just not allowing companies to keep wells as inactive for very long periods of time, because that sort of increases the risk that they eventually become orphaned. So, we should fix the mess that there is, but we should make changes so that we don't end up in this situation again.
And it looks like we have Devin here. Let's go, Devin.
Hey guys, sorry about that. I had to switch on to my phone. My Wi-Fi wasn't quite working. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks so much for joining us. So I have a bit of a longer question. So specifically, Calgary, like you said, has this perfect synergy of a highly educated population. We have a wealth of existing energy infrastructure. And then on the flip side, we have a younger population that's leaving because we're not taking advantage of these things. I started off with a general question of how can we kind of leverage these things that we have to make this transition to technologies like geothermal heat and energy, and the methane or hydrogen from methane production that you talked about. How can we become the Silicon Valley kind of energy? It's kind of what I thought about. Like, why is that not happening yet? Was my first question. So.
Yeah, great question. I mean, so there is there's a lot of opportunity for sure, but there are also a lot of barriers, right? So. And I guess even just more fundamentally, like when you think about building up essentially a new industry, you need to have the idea. It needs to be, there needs to be a business case there, but you also need to have investors and people that, see that as an opportunity. And so historically, and in almost every example that we can look at, and even in our own backyard, in the case of the oil sands, what really started off that industry was some pretty significant government investment and kind of government showing that this could work, and then investors come in on the back end of that. And so since you mentioned Silicon Valley, people have for many years talked about, well, why can't we get more of the venture capital model that, is what has proven somewhat successful for, a lot of the tech companies into some of these, more like infrastructure and chemicals and oil and gas and energy space. And it's quite hard, right? That model for a lot of different reasons, but, one of which just like the scale of funding that's required and the timescales isn't necessarily a good match. And so there's really, a pretty significant role for government to play in kind of kickstarting these industries. And so that's where, I think I think is one of the big things to have happen. I mean, obviously you need entrepreneurs that are bringing forward these ideas and that are willing to work towards it, but it's a long uphill road if you don't get some kind of support in bringing these projects and these new ideas, kind of at least proving them out and bringing them to the market ready to invest in.
Okay. And then to follow up with that, say in a year from now, let's hope that the coronavirus is ending, and say that we don't get all the stimulus money that we're hoping for, and we're sitting where we are in a year. What's something that, for example, the Calgary Climate Hub could do to bring the ball forward a year from now?
Great question.
Excellent question. Yeah, I mean, I think, municipalities and the city have a big role to play, right? And so Calgary, has a lot that it can do, I think, to have an impact. Everything from its own energy production and consumption with NMAX, but procurement processes are a pretty powerful way of starting to drive innovation, and so making sure that generally speaking, government procurement is pretty risk adverse, and for good reasons, right? You want to make sure that when you're spending public money, you're not taking big risks and you're getting, good value and trustworthy things for your money. But that said, sometimes that can lead to procurement approaches that are sort of focused on always buying, yesterday's technology because for sure that works. And so, certainly there's municipalities that have flexed that kind of procurement arm to look at greening up their own operations beyond even the electricity piece, which then also helps to provide that pull and create opportunities for businesses, and also signal more broadly to the investment community that this is a place that is going to be fruitful for doing that kind of work. So I think definitely working with the municipal government to find those opportunities where they can make procurement decisions or other investment decisions that are going to be cost savings, but then also thinking about those other benefits.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you very much, Devin. Devin is a Calgary Climate Hub board member and has also been a Climate Hub member on its own as well, and part of the fight for climate in this city. Thanks for participating, Devin.
See you guys.
I feel like